right, thanks everybody for showing up. So I'm going to say some stuff that'll be relevant to a few of you, probably, hopefully more on the live stream, and then we'll just chat for a while. And that is, you may have heard, and if you haven't heard, go watch it on YouTube. It's available for free, everybody, even if you're not at OCON. Tal gave a incredible talk, I thought inspiring and exciting, about how ARI is tripling down on what they're now calling Ayn Rand University, which is we want people to take objectivism and turn it into an intellectual career so that they can genuinely have a powerful influence, and we want a lot of those people. And so I just wanted to say one of the things that I've encountered as somebody who works with a lot of objectivists who are interested in ideas and want to communicate ideas is the feeling of okay, but I have to have a practical career first. And so I want to say briefly something that's, it's almost uncomfortable to talk about because it sounds like bragging, but it's more, I really want to win over these young, ambitious young people who could go make $1 million in Silicon Valley. An intellectual career may make you millions, but what I will say is that what I get to do is I get to talk about objectivism all the time, and people pay me way more money than I ever expected to make in life. And so my general point is that there's so much opportunity out there, but two things have to be true. Number one, you have to be really, really good. And two, you have to be paying attention to what are the actual desires of buyers in the market. My friend and mentor Alex Epstein talks about what he calls a career Venn diagram, which is when you're thinking about your career, there's what I like, what I'm good at, and what people want. And where a lot of people fail is either they're doing, sometimes people fail because they do stuff they don't like because it pays. But I think for this kind of audience and for, I think, most of the people who follow me, the error is either you're not good enough yet, and that's fine. I, in 2007, left the Ayn Rand Institute, not because I didn't love it, but because I felt like there were a certain number of skill sets that I wanted to have that I didn't yet have that was going to make my work really valuable. And I thought, oh, I'll get it given what Alex is doing at the Center for Industrial Progress. So by that point, I had been in objectivism for 20 years and had been at ARI for 11 years. And still, there were holes, there were gaps. So it's fine, but if you're not good, nobody's going to pay you anything. You won't be able to have the career you want. And then the second, on the point of what are people willing to pay for? There's this thing that fiction writers will often talk about, that particularly screenwriters, where there's what the character wants and what the character needs. And what they want is what they're consciously after, right? Oh, I want to get the girl, or I want to, fight the enemy or conquer the enemy. And then there's what they need. And what often happens, and to the point that it's almost a trope today, is, oh, they don't get what they want, but they get what they need. That distinction captures something really important. But in business, it's kind of the opposite, which is that you have to sell to what people actually want. And if you hear objectivists talk, it's, well, I know what they need. They need a philosophy. Businessmen need a moral defense. They need to stand up for themselves. That might be what they need, and I agree with you, that's what they need. But is that what they want? Is that what they're looking for? Are they sitting in their computer Googling, how do I get a moral defense of what I'm doing? Because if they're not, you're basically condemning yourself to poverty and frustration. But what you can do and what you should do, and what I've done with Alex, what I've done independently, is you can help people get what they want, and often that means you have a deeper view of what they actually need in order to get what they want. So in the work we do at Center for Industrial Progress, for example, is what they basically want is to feel that have proud employees and have policies that don't make their industry illegal. What they need is a new philosophy of energy, and indeed a new philosophy. So we give them both. But what are we speaking to? We're speaking to the want that they're actually trying to satisfy. So bottom line in all this is that if you're young and thinking about what you want to do with your career, if you're, let's say like me, not exactly young anymore, and you're rethinking what would make my career even better, I really encourage you to give real consideration to doing something using objectivism and being an intellectual. And I think there's just a ton of opportunity there, particularly if you get your abilities to where like your highest potential, and then if you really focus on who am I trying to help and what problem are they trying to solve. And I think if you do that, then like there's no reason that you can't have a really incredible career helping spread the ideas that you care about. So that's basically the spiel I wanted to give. I'm gonna say, some of you have heard this because I've already handed out a bunch of the cards. And indeed, maybe you guys could like pass these back and make sure everybody grab 4 or 5. So these are, I have a novel coming out officially it's coming out in November. What these cards are gonna do are give you a URL for, you can download today the novel, but it's a preview copy because we haven't done like the final, like is every comma where it needs to be. The plot and characters won't change. If they do, then you will see me in tears somewhere in the lobby. But I'm trying to get my publisher, the way that they think about things is they told me, we just want to get 10,000 copies into people's hands because we think if we have to give away 10,000, it'll sell 100,000. So if you can just hand these out, I don't know that I officially can do this, but if you like share it on Twitter and social media, it's not even OCON attendees. I won't be mad. I don't even think my publisher will be mad. But yeah, we're just trying to get it read. I'm happy to talk about the novel, but I'm not going to give you a whole spiel unless you guys are interested. But thank you for reading it, promoting it. One of the things I think that they'll do when they send you the printed copy is encourage you to review it on Amazon. And let me just underline that particularly for fiction, even more than nonfiction, Amazon reviews are everything. So if you like the novel, please review it. If you don't like it, don't ever talk about it at all. We'll be in good shape. So thank you guys for coming, and the floor is open for questions or comments.
Don, is the cover of the book used in this postcard at all? Is this...
Yeah, if you go to the URL, you'll see the actual cover, which I was on the car ride from the airport here to OCON when they sent it, and thankfully, because I hadn't seen anything of it, thankfully I was mostly happy with it. I just asked them to change the font. So you'll see what's close to the final cover. Bennett.
Don, so I think we're all familiar with your nonfiction writing, which is really excellent. Talk about the transition to writing fiction, or have you written fiction before?
Well, I always had a foot in the fiction waters before I came to ARI, and indeed I wrote this, and there's probably some people in this room who have read it, which terrifies me, or mortifies me more accurately. I had written like a humorous novel in like my really early 20s, so like I was interested in fiction, and I thought I was going to become a fiction writer, and then I just had this opportunity to work at ARI, and I was like, oh yeah, somebody's going to pay me to write? Like, I'll go do that. And I love both, but it had always been in the back of my mind. And what ultimately happened is when I went to work for Alex, my goal was to build my skill set. And so it's not like energy is my passion in the way it's his passion. I love it, I value it, but it wasn't the fulfilling career I wanted. It was, I need to do this in order to learn what I need to learn. And when I realized, and my wife realized, because I ended up being miserable in certain ways, was, oh, you're only happy when you're writing a book. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm only happy when I'm writing a book. And so I had this idea for a novel that I worked on for a year, and it had a lot of promising features to it, but it wasn't good enough, and it was way too ambitious for a first novel, like spanning continents and different points of view. And so I kind of set that to the side, but I had this other idea that was floating around in my mind for a couple of years. And then in November of 2019, I started working on it. And we can talk more about the novel itself, but just to give you a flavor of where I'm coming from and what you can expect broadly. So this is not I almost want to ask for a show of hands. I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many of you guys have read objectivist fiction, not Ayn Rand, that just makes you go, oh, this is not that. This is a thriller. It deals with ideas, but it's not intended to be like this is to win people over to the cause. It's intending to give you just an awesome, 8 hours or whatever it takes you to get through it of like turning the page and hopefully falling in love with the character and being surprised by a cool plot. But what I really want to do in fiction is, I think one of my virtues as a writer in nonfiction has been that I'm not as smart as like many objectivists. And I'm putting that a little silly, but what the truth of it is it's really hard for me to understand things. I have to work really, really hard, and so I like want to get it really simple, not oversimplified, but I want to get it really simple. So what I specialized in was I'll read these arcane, philosophy and economic journals, but then I want to turn it into something that, like, your grandfather can read at the beach or whatever. And in fiction, it's not an issue of intelligence, but of laziness, which is, like, when I write a book, if I have to read 3 pages and there's not like 20 things that have happened, it's like, oh, this is the most boring thing on earth. Now, my favorite novelists, like Hugo, I love more than anything on this earth, but it's real effort for me to read 20 pages of a description of, nature. And so I thought, that's not a criticism of him, it's me. Like, I just don't have the attention span. So I said, could you write something that had kind of real depth and beauty to it, but the pacing and the excitement and the surprise of a modern thriller? Could you have something that was fast-paced, but it left you with meaning and beauty? And so I'm not claiming that I've fully achieved that yet, but that's what I'm going for, is to kind of marry 19th century romanticism with what modern readers are expecting when they go to the beach and open up a novel. Yes?
Yes. In your writing career, and specifically fiction here, did you start with do you have your a short story collection that you are not yet ready to release, or do you have, is that something that you, because approaching the novel is very ambitious.
No, it's fun. I had a discussion with Leonard about this, where, because he was writing all of these short stories, and I told him I had a novel, and he goes, "Did you write these short stories?" I'm like, well, I don't read short stories, but it would have been way easier, because I had to write 2 novels that aren't going to see the light of day before I finally wrote a 3rd that worked. So no, I just didn't explore the format, even though I think probably, like, if a young aspiring fiction writer said, "What should I do?" I'd say, write screenplays or short. Don't write a damn novel. Like, it just takes 10 times as long to learn all the lessons. But for me, I couldn't do it because my view was, well, I don't read short stories, so how am I going to write them? Like, I've read some, like, I know what they are, but I'm not going to, like, I'm only going to do that if, like, Lisa Van Dam tells me, hey, read this, and, then, but it's just not for me. So, no, I did things the hard way, but, I think the serious point here is that people can give you the advice of what's generically intelligent, but that always has to bow down to your natural values. And so, like, if, I tell you, hey, the best thing you could do is just write screenplays, and you're like, I hate movies. It's too bad. That's your job. No, it has to be subordinate to your values. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so you said you would like to get people who could go into Silicon Valley to go into the intellectual realm instead, and you said, have that Venn diagram of what you're good at, what you like, and what makes money, right? Now, would you encourage people to go into any field, any kind of intellectual realm that inspires them or impassions them? Or do you think there are specific fields that you would encourage people to go into to write more or to challenge the ideas? Because you went into energy when you started.
My view is there's almost certainly money to be made everywhere. Like, you can do whatever you find interesting, you have to do it the right way. And so it might not be exactly like what, if you're just like, Ton, all I care about is the relationship between objectivism and Pokemon, I'm not guaranteeing you that is like a viable business, but I'd say if we go to like one level of abstraction higher, of I'm interested in like the intersection of popular culture and philosophy, there's something there. So, no, I'm not going to tell anybody to go into it. And the only reason I went into energy is because, like, one of my best friends, that's what he did, and he was, you know, had learned a ton doing it that I wanted to acquire that knowledge. So it's not like I picked energy because it was energy. I picked energy because Alex solved energy, or I'd say he would probably want me to say is in the process of solving it. But no, like be selfish, man. Like when I say, guys, I don't want you guys to work in Silicon Valley. I want you to pursue intellectual careers. What I'm trying to convince you is that give it some thought and see if it really can be a selfish value, and don't let false objections stop you. But if it's I don't like it, like don't do it to serve the cause. We need a lot of cool people in Silicon Valley too. Who else is gonna pay for all these kids going through the ARI University? Cool. Anyone else? Yes.
So I'll steer us away from your fiction. Is there an Ingenuism book in the plan?
Well, it's funny. So Ingenuism is a project I'm doing with Yaron and his longtime investing partner, Robert Hendershot. And Robert's not an objectivist, but he's been thinking about progress for a long time, and he's been, you know, working with Yaron for decades. And so he's a finance professor, and Yaron initially came to me saying like, hey, I want to help write this book on progress with my friend Robert, and you know, given the way I actually write my books, which is you write them, why don't you come and help me do this? He will not be offended that I put it that way. And so I said, well, I don't want to do government policy to like, I've written 4 books on politics. I don't give a damn about politics. I mean, I give a damn. I want a good result. I don't like it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to do that. It's just what people were paying me to do, and it's important, you know, existentially. But for me personally, I said, I don't want to do that. And he said, no, this is like about, like, what are the actual, not just the fundamentals of progress, like what objectivism gives you is that it's the free human mind that's the source of human progress. But what are the exact mechanisms at lower levels of abstraction that determine how innovative we're going to be, how much progress we're going to see, whether this company is successful versus that company, why is Silicon Valley, and it can't be recreated or hasn't been recreated, you know, in other places that are trying. Let's really dig into the meat. And indeed, ultimately what they want to do, because they're coming from a finance investing side, is they want to take these ideas and turn it into investment products. And I said, A, that's very good if you can do it, because then we'll all get filthy rich. I like that. But B, I think it makes you more influential as an intellectual if you are giving people a concrete path to action to implement your ideas. So who here has heard of Peter Schiff? So Peter Schiff is a guy influenced by Austrian economics and has been telling people to invest in gold because there's going to be a complete economic disaster every year. And he became super successful after there ultimately was one in 2008. And I'm being a little mean to him, but I mean, he was explaining it and predicting it in various ways, but like, you know, the saying goes, he predicted, you know, 10 of the last 2 recessions. But part of what makes him effective is that he gives you not just this is what's happening in the world, but this is what you should do about it. You to benefit, to personally benefit. So imagine if Yaron's show is not just like, this is why everything sucks, but here's what you can do to profit from it. Well, that's what we're trying to ultimately achieve, and I think that makes you really valuable as an intellectual seller if you can do it. And I mean, I mentioned Peter Schiff. I don't think that his advice, which is, I was on Twitter the other day and somebody said, the new inflation report's out. Can't wait to see what it is. Peter Schiff's going to be talking about it at 9. I was like, I have not read it, but I'm predicting he says the solution is to buy gold. So we're trying to do something that's hopefully more helpful than that. But anyway, I didn't answer your question yet. So initially the idea was like, help us write a book. And what I said to him was, well, why don't we first build a following and then write the book rather than doing what we always do, which is write a book and then try to find an audience for it. And he said, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And so that's what we're trying to do is really work out the theory, build up an audience, and then eventually there will be a book, because I can't not, like, I have to write a book, which some ask about what I'm writing right now, because that's interesting. Lynn,
What are you writing right now?
that's such a great question. Give her applause, guys. That was. All right, so. Oh, this is being live streamed. All right, to help, I'm gonna set it up in part the way it truly came about, which is there was like this whole debate online that centered around Craig Biddle and being on Prager, and I don't want to go into the details of that necessarily, though I will if anybody wants to ask. But I just had a thought at a certain point, because somebody was asking for advice on what are the best books to give people who are, to get them interested in objectivism, and he recommended his book, which is fair as an author. Hopefully you think your book is pretty good. And I thought, oh, come on. There is no good nonfiction book to give most people to get them interested in objectivism. There's amazing, OPAR is life-changing, incredible, and some people it does work as their first book, but I still don't, from my perspective, and this is not an insult to certainly anybody speaking at this conference, we haven't gotten that book yet. We have Atlas, we have Ayn Rand stuff, which is amazing, but I just feel like the way I thought about it was, if I met a 19-year-old Bill Gates and I had one opportunity to give him one recommendation of a nonfiction book that would make him think, oh, I really need to pay attention to objectivism, what am I going to give him? And so I said, I don't think that book exists. There's amazing books that we have, but not the one that I have this vision for. So I said, well, I'll write it then. So it's called SelfMade Manifesto, and it's not a book about objectivism. So most people, when they're like, oh, I want to sell people on objectivism, it's here's a book about objectivism, here's a book to understand Ayn Rand's philosophy. No, this is a book for somebody who wants to find happiness and meaning in their life. Now, I'm an objectivist, so it's all throughout the book. We go into ethics, we go into epistemology, we even go into art. We don't go into politics, because like I said, I don't like politics. But it's written to the best young minds. So it's not written for the Prager audience, it's written for the best young minds. How do we win the Tyler Cowens of the world, if you know who that is? How do we win the young Sam Harrises? What would really convince them? And that's what I'm trying to achieve with this book. So I've got like 150,000 words drafted, and I am pretty confident it'll come out like mid next year. But I'm super excited about it, and you will have to, well, actually, I was gonna say you'll have to wait, but somebody at this conference, and I'm blanking out on who, said, well, why don't you start doing like just a monthly or even weekly video where you tell people, hey, this is what I was working on this week, this is what I was thinking about. And I was like, that's actually a really good idea, so I'm probably gonna do that. We'll see how much of like the actual writing I'll share, because Rourke has that line about he produces more garbage than anyone, but it ends up in the trash can. Without comparing myself to Rourke, yeah, a lot of what's currently there will end up in the trash can. So we'll have to see how much I share publicly. But that's the main thing I'm working on this next year. Yes.
Don, you recently wrote some very funny and interesting things about Kant. Your newsletter, where you wrote those commentaries about Kant. Was it just a project to have and you just ended it because you were focusing on other things, or are you thinking of continuing doing that?
Yeah, so I did this, I started a newsletter where I was writing section by section everything in the Critique of Pure Reason, but as if it were written by like the biggest bro college student ever. But like really you could get the philosophy from it, but it would like hopefully like make you laugh as you're reading it, which nobody has laughed reading the Critique of Pure Reason except by going, this is ridiculous. And I really liked that project, and I want to come back to it, but once I came up with the idea of the Self-Made Manifesto, I was like, I have to write this, so that just has to take precedence over everything. But no, I want to get back to it, and I mean, people enjoyed it. I liked writing it, although to be frank, I had only gotten through like the first 5 sections, which is really introductory material, and once you get into his actual like discussion of time and space, if I can make that clear and funny, frankly, I deserve a Nobel Prize. It's something else, man. But no, it's like, I mean, who was talking about this? Oh, something that has nothing to do with the conference, so you guys won't get the reference. But anyway, I was listening to this business guy that I'm trying to do some work with, and he's like saying like, if your business is not fun, why are you in your business? He's talking to entrepreneurs, right? And my view is, if I'm not having a lot of fun writing about ideas, like I'm gonna go do something else. And so I'm interested in philosophy, and I take ideas seriously, and I have profound values, but you know, I also like spend an absurd amount of time watching South Park, and like I need that aspect of like irreverence mixed into what I do. And Kant was like, all right, how can I? And in a sense, he deserves it. So, yes.
Two questions. When you were talking about your current work, you said "we" about 3 times. Do you have a co-author?
For the Ingenuism project, I do.
Okay. Well, you said it when you were talking about the how to live.
I'm just very humble, so I don't want to hog all the credit for my own books. No, I didn't realize I did that, but
Okay.
no, I kind of feel, I kind of,
author for 2 people, so he's just not used to writing books.
yeah, I mean, only one of my books was officially in my name back in the day.
And I had another question.
Yeah, there's one other thing I was gonna say. Oh, yeah, I want to do more screenplay work, and I might try to hunt down a partner, because particularly if you're doing something with humor in it, it usually is good to have somebody to go, dude, that's not funny. And not just an editor, but like a collaborator. Because if you follow my Twitter feed, you probably have had the thought at one time or another, dude, that's really not funny. Hopefully I'll catch that before going out into the world. But go ahead with your follow-up.
You recommended a book called I Am Pilgrim by Terry Hayes
Yes.
several years ago, which I bought and read, and then I gave it away, and now I want to get another copy because I wanted to read it. It was really good. In what way were you influenced by that book?
Oh, so she mentioned this book, I Am Pilgrim by Terry Hayes, which in my opinion is the best thriller that's ever been written. And how was I influenced by the book? Well, I mean, the silly answer is I wasn't influenced, I was intimidated. I mean, because, he's a longtime screenwriter, and he worked a long time and just did something incredible with that book. But what I did do is I went back and reread the climax, which I think is the most brilliant climax of any thriller ever. And I'm not claiming to have equaled it, but I said, if I can't at least think, hey, for a first novel, you really strive for something that integrative, surprising, powerful, unexpected, then give up. So I set that as my target, but it was, he haunted me the whole time. He's incredible. I highly recommend everybody read that book. And
Do you mind repeating the book name?
I Am Pilgrim. You might even notice a similarity to my book title, which is not coincidental at all.
Hey, Don?
Yes.
Can you talk about the process, the differences between writing nonfiction and writing fiction, and how you work on fiction every day as opposed to nonfiction?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And in many ways, I did not find that big a difference. There's something I like more about fiction, in that like I'm living with characters and I'm living in a world of emotion more than when I'm writing a nonfiction book. It's a little bit different for the SelfMade Manifesto, because I mean it's a book about morality, values, success, and happiness, and so it's more emotionally laden. But when you're writing fiction, most of the joy, I think most of the reason people write fiction is you get to live in this world mentally and emotionally. And you know that, I mean, you've written way more novels than I have. And that's the real pleasure of it. So, but in terms of process, for me, it's more or less the same thing. You know, you have research, you have to work out logic, you have to solve hard problems. And what I did find here, which has been helpful in nonfiction, is I realized it is super easy for me to solve even the hardest problems. I'll go, this is completely impossible. And then what I'll do is I'll try to pinpoint exactly what question I'm trying to answer. Like, I need my main character to get to point X. when she's in an emotional spot, why? How is that gonna happen? And then once I have clarity about the question, I walk around the neighborhood until I have the answer. And it has never happened except for twice that didn't produce the answer. And I had done that with nonfiction, but I hadn't worked it out as a technique. But I realized, no, it's a perfect technique, except for I ran into 2 super gnarly problems with the novel that, I mean, basically I spent a week in depression. It's hopeless, I'm gonna throw it in the garbage, and then eventually I went on a walk that solved it, but it took miles instead of minutes. Yes.
Have you ever tried to work on both nonfiction and fiction at the same time and had one as your kind of central focus while the other had progress being made on it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So, in a sense, yes, right? Like I wrote my novel while I was still working at CIP, so I was doing nonfiction philosophy work all the time. But I can only work on one book at a time because I think nonfiction or fiction, when you're writing a book, at least for me, I have to live in that universe. Even if I can't do it full time, it has to just be the thing that's, Alex once told me, he goes, I want your shower thoughts. Like, in fact, this is when I told him I was writing a previous novel and I just started his company. He goes, like, is there a problem here? Like, are you unfulfilled? Because I want your I want your mind to be on the company. And I think that was, it's something I couldn't fully give because, like, for me, if I'm not writing a book, why am I waking up in the morning? And so, but there can only be one universe I'm living in at a given time. And now you've probably heard the story about Ayn Rand, like where she took years and years to get out of what she called the sense of life at the fountainhead so that she could write Atlas Shrugged. For me, it's not that intense. Like as soon as I finish one book, this for me is the worst part of writing books, is that then you gotta like go on and sell them. And for me, as soon as I'm done with it, I'm like, all right, I want to write the next one. And so I actually under-market my books. Now that I have a profit incentive, because I own all the copyrights to my old ones, now I actually make money if people buy this one. So you guys can really help, like, give me a lot more vacation time. But no, I can only do one universe at a time. And I tell people, be very cautious of working on multiple major creative projects at a time. But again, people might be different. There are authors who are kind of like, they play around with different projects, and I'm like, I can do other things, but I can only have one thing that I'm waking up in the morning. Because this is how I actually do my work, which is, even though I can work whenever the hell I want to now, I basically work 9 to 4 on for my clients. And my writing that I do for me usually takes place between 4 and 9 o'clock with, an hour out of there to wake up the kids and so on. So I only get one morning chunk of time. It can only go to one project for me to do it efficiently. I think I had you first and then you.
Speaking about money, what do you expect commercially from I Am Justice?
Well, I don't expect anything because I've been disappointed before. Now, partly, it's why I chose the publisher I did, because mainstream publishers, this is what they do. They say, hey, look, we're not gonna market your book, you have to bring us an audience. We're not gonna edit your book, you better bring us a polished product, and we're gonna take 90% of the revenue. What do you think of that? That sounds like garbage. The company that's publishing my book was started by one of the top editors and agents in the New York publishing world. And he teamed up with a guy who's one of the top book marketers in the world. And what they said is, here's our deal. We'll give you a ton of editing. We're gonna give you a ton of marketing, i.e., hey, give away all the books to everybody at this conference. And you keep 50% of the revenues. I said, that's a way better deal. That math I can do. I'm not great at math, but that's what, and look, the only thing that traditional publishers do that they can't is get me into Barnes & Noble. But look, I've sold a decent amount of books in my time. And today from bookstores, maybe 10%. So I'm getting 10% of the revenue from the book, and only 10% of my sales are coming from there. And like, you're not actually helping me produce a great book and build an audience to help that. So, I mean, I'll put it this way. My hope is, I mean, they said they believe it can sell 100,000 copies, and I can do the math of $10 times 100,000, 50% minus 10,000 for, you know, the first ones they're giving away. I don't have to work for a year given my expenses, or 2 years even. I will, but no, so that's, I don't expect that, but that would be really awesome. Yeah.
My question was actually regarding the publishing process and how you go about selecting them. I
So
guess-
this is, I'm glad you asked about, well, go ahead, you were gonna elaborate.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, for each book that you do publish, is it kind of a blank slate where you go out and just look at other publishers again and try to see who gives you the best deal? Or do you have like tried and true publishers you go back to first?
I mean, I've published with 2 mainstream publishers. They were really one, but the publishing world is like, I don't know, there's probably a great analogy, but let's just say it, you know, there's a lot of shifting and changing. But basically I was at Palgrave Macmillan, and they kind of spun off into Harper's Collins, like with Equals Unfair. I think it was HarperCollins was the official name on Equals Unfair. Do you remember, Lynn? But it was the same people, but now Palgrave Macmillan really specializes in more academic-oriented nonfiction, whereas they were kind of a blend back in my day. Indeed, Palgrave Macmillan is publishing, Mark, are you here still? Yeah, Mark's book. You want to tell people, you don't have to give them the whole spiel, but just the title?
The title's The Municipal Financial Crisis. And it's about what I consider to be cities, local governments just out of control in terms of the way they scope their activities. Coming out early next year.
Ooh, congratulations.
So yeah, and I'm gonna be hyping that book. I played a small role in helping Mark write it, but he did a really amazing job, and so I'm excited about that.
A significant role during a formative period of the book.
Well, thank you. But what I was gonna say is, so I've gone through that process. I will. All right, I shouldn't say this on film. So let's say I will be surprised if I ever work with a mainstream publisher again. I just think they don't add almost any value, particularly not once you can put in your resume. Oh, I'm a real, I've been public, but no. Like now, I'm either going to self-publish or work with kind of these niche publishers like StoryGrid, where I think they can help me and add real value to what I'm doing, because they added incredible value. Like, So I worked with an editor, and it was exactly what used to happen with Onkar and nonfiction and Alex and nonfiction, which is I thought something was great, and then they go, no, this isn't working, and I go, okay, great, all right, I'm gonna make the book better. And then you get on like round 7 or 8 of that, and you're like, I can't do it anymore, I can't do it. And I had conversations with my wife where I said, they're gonna take it or leave it, I'm not gonna even, I don't wanna deal with this is ridiculous. I always slept on it. I learned my lesson. Lynn knows I'm not good at holding my tongue with authority, even if it costs me, but I've learned my lesson. So I'd wait till the next morning, and inevitably I wake up and go, he's right. I just gotta push further and further and further, and so I think we ended up with something really excellent, but it's only because I had an amazing editor. And that's after I worked with about 10 other people to get, maybe even more, to get feedback, even before I got to StoryGrid. So I did about 20 drafts of this novel, and it almost broke me. Like, it was really, because I basically put myself back in the beginner mode, and I'm trying to build a business at the same time, right? Like, the pandemic's hit more or less when I'm really in the kind of trenches rewriting this novel, and it's like, all right, can I actually support my family without a steady paycheck? And so it was intense, but totally worth it. And it's a tragedy that more authors aren't getting good editors like this, because I have always said, as much as I like to take credit for the work I do, I'd be nowhere worth being without the editors and intellectual influences that I've had, and that's as true as in fiction and nonfiction. Or let's say maybe I'd be somewhere, but I'd be like a third of where I am now. Like, I'd still be on this really long path, and good people to support you can speed you up so much. I mean, that's why, I don't know how much you guys know about what I'm doing nowadays, but one of the things I realized was, I said, there's a lot of people in the objectivist world who want to do projects. Maybe they don't even want to be a professional at it, but like they have one book they really want to get out, or one project that they really want to make really effective. And I said, there's nowhere for them to go. And I said, well, I can do that. Maybe that would be helpful. And so a lot of what I do is work with people who maybe they don't get to work with Onkar and Alex Epstein and Yoram Brook for 11 years. But maybe they can work with me. Now for young people who are just getting started, it's tricky because I charge outrageous prices. But what I do try to do is for young people is do some free work, at least. Maybe I can't like read your whole manuscript and give you weeks and weeks of feedback like with Mark. But if you're young and you're trying to do something, I'll do calls with you and would like just give you kind of off the cuff feedback when I can. So please take advantage of that, because again, for me, my mission in life is to help objectivists be more effective, and it goes back to just a core value of mine, which is laziness. I don't want to have to write all the books. So please take advantage. What time is it? Does anybody know?
7-11 on the wall up there.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Right. Yeah. So we can, if you guys have questions, we can keep going a little bit longer.
As a wannabe writer, I would ask you, what was the most surprising kind of feedback and editing that you got on your work, particularly in relation to those things that you held most deeply as, oh, I've got this is right?
In fiction or nonfiction is very different answers.
Can I get both?
Well, since you were the only one raising your hand, yeah, I can totally riff on your question. Well, let me start with fiction, because I know exactly what the answer is there. So I have a screenwriting instructor, Corey Mandel. And the reason I chose him to be my instructor is I never intended to write screenplays, but I heard this guy just giving writing advice where he said there's two kinds of writers. There's the more intuitive, and they're the ones who have these characters who are super real and like interesting, you want to spend time with them, but they can't tell a story to save their lives. And then there's characters he calls conceptual writers who have cool plots, like everything's very kind of tight and like you're turning the pages except for their characters are kind of bland and stock. There's no emotional investment in it. And he said if you want to work in Hollywood, you need to be a master of both skill sets. And so that's kind of what he helps you develop. And I heard that and I go, oh, well, my characters are great, but yeah, I need some help with my conceptual stuff. And I went and started working with him, and what became clear immediately was, Watkins, your blind spot is the 100% in the other direction. I could make, quote, interesting characters, except they weren't characters. Because whenever they had to take action, that was motivated by where I needed the plot to go, not motivated by where they, as a human being, would take themselves. And that was the transformative thing, where I said, everything that happens has to come from this girl. I mean, all the characters, but I always think in terms of my protagonist. It has to come from where she is in terms of her goals, her values, her emotions. And ultimately, that needs to be a tight, fascinating, page-turning, logical plot. But you can't just like say, like, this girl has had, somebody in her life hurt or, killed or whatever, and then in like the next one, she's cheerfully running into a party because you need her to do that for the plot. I didn't do that, but that equivalent, right? Where you're just not following the reality of the character. And I realized that's a huge weakness, and a lot of the work I had to do was like, what does it mean to understand a character? And I mean, there's people in this room who know that way better than I do, Stuart and Dave and people, but for me that was just a big revelation. And in nonfiction, in nonfiction, Oh, well, I'll tell you one nonfiction lesson I had that was the biggest surprise, which is that I had been a professional writer for several years when I finally learned what a paragraph was. And, I mean, obviously I knew it was something indented or spaces between, but like, what is a paragraph doing? And I wrote about this for my newsletter, so some of you would have seen it. But let me make a wider point, since that I've already kind of stated. It's being a craftsman. That is part of why I turned out to be a good writer, was not because I was like just born with an innate talent, because I was so interested in how every little piece of it worked. How does a paragraph work? Like, how can I get better at outlining? Whereas most of the people who say they want to write and never amount to anything, they're not interested. What they want is a book to be there in front of them that has their name on it. Or sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's they want to be a famous author. They're not interested in the book at all. Objectivists usually don't make that level of mistake, but you have to be interested in the art of writing. And the art of writing is, I mean, it's like anything else. Like, how many of you here do coding at all? Right? Like, how many people, like, people don't walk around going, oh, I wish I had software I designed, right? Like, if they did, but people do that in writing all the time.
Oh my God.
And if, like, you told that person, it's like, well, if you want software you design, like, learn to code. And they said, no, like, that's, you'd say, all right, then you're not serious. But I think it's that kind of thing happens in writing all the time, and so it's, you have to be aggressive. And if you don't want to, that's fine. A friend of mine, Eric Daniels, is one of the best teachers and lecturers I've ever met. And years ago, he gave a course, well, let me put it differently. People have pressured him for years, like, why aren't you writing a book? Why aren't you writing a book? And I think part of what people realized over time is he doesn't want to be a writer. And that's fine, because guess what? You can make an amazing impact today by just being an amazing teacher, an amazing lecturer. Good for Eric for doing that. And so if you don't want to write, if you don't want to master the craft, there's no problem with that. I mean, you could hire me to do it. I tried to convince Eric to let me turn his lectures into books years ago. But just know that if you want to write, it goes back to the first thing I was saying. You have to be good. My favorite business quote, you know, when people ask me for advice, is I say, all right, well, the starting point is what, oh my gosh, I'm going, but Steve Martin says, you know, you guys know the title of his book, So Good They Can't, or no, his line is So Good They Can't Ignore You. Cal Newport turned that into a title of his book. Forgive me if I told this, but this is just a funny story, which is, I know Teller, because Teller's kind of friendly with some objectivists from Penn and Teller. And I went out to their show in Vegas years ago, and afterwards we were supposed to hang out, and he said, well, I gotta sign some autographs, go wait in the back, in the monkey room. I was like, the monkey room? He goes, the room with monkeys all over the door, it'll be fine. So I walk back there, and sure enough, there's a door with monkeys all over it, and I guess this is the right one. And I walk in, and there's like 4 people talking, and I sit down awkwardly with these 4 people I don't recognize, and I realize, oh shit, I recognize one of them, because right here across from me is Steve Martin, who I've met quite a few celebrities, and it you know, it's fine. But this was one where like, I was like, oh my God, like this is, I admire that guy like nothing else. The cool thing though, and this I think shows you why he's been so successful, is he spent the whole time being a fanboy to Penn and Teller. You guys did this and it was so amazing. How did you do that? Oh, and how did you figure out like what the odd, like he wanted to understand how they did this cool, amazing thing. And you're like, dude, you're already the most like famous comedian and like you're, you know, perfect on a stage and so on. But it's precisely because he's interested in the craft and he's passionate about the craft. And so like, if you want to be a writer, like if you don't have that, maybe you can cultivate it. And it's not like everybody has to write that to have a book. Some people, you know, they just have useful information. But in general, you want to be a craftsman. And that means having that passion for even dumb questions like, what is a paragraph for? All right, we'll take one more if anybody has it. And then, I mean, I'm going to hang around, but I don't want to make you hold the phone any longer. And besides, we'll save all the really interesting, controversial stuff for after the live stream goes on. Because you guys paid to be here. They did nothing. Go ahead.
I wanted to hear the nonfiction half of that question.
Well, no, that's where I got into the paragraph. So you failed. All right. Yeah, Bennett.
Don, you were working on a book, taking Greg's and Ankar's lectures on liberty, is that correct? And what's the status of that?
I actually don't know. I ended up playing. That was a really. I mean, it was a super fun project to work on. In that those are two of the thinkers who've had a bigger influence on me than anybody except for Leonard and Alex. And Ankar, it's hard to disentangle. I learned so much and had a great time, but I think their vision, particularly Greg's vision of how, of what it would look like, made it that I was adding less and not as much value as we initially expected, just because they came to a different vision. So I helped kind of do some research and structuring, but they basically took it over at a certain point. So I don't know where it is, and I'm excited to see it come out because those guys are brilliant and those lectures are
Those
brilliant.
lectures were really, really good.
Yeah, I mean that's put it this way. You guys have heard me comment twice on how little I like politics. I was willing to do a politics book because it was from those guys. So, all right, thanks everybody for showing up. Like I said, I'm gonna stick around for a while, but you guys, we're done. Thank you. I owe you. If you want me to buy you a drink or something.